Thank you so much for joining us. It's fantastic to be here with Ian Brennan, who is a writer and a producer.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
So we're going to get into who you are, what your story is.
Yeah.
And could you tell us about your childhood? What was your childhood like?
Grew up sort of bedroomy. I was described that I kind of grew up in a John Hughes movie, bedroom community just outside of Chicago. My mother was a school teacher. My dad is a former Catholic priest, of all things. They met when he was at the Newman Center at Ohio State University. My mother was a grad student, fell in love, left the priesthood, thankfully, and had my sister and I. So just a very pleasant, bucolic, non-shouty upbringing. Very peaceful. I credit every ounce of what you would describe as my success to parents who never once questioned it. My parents were big, never had the conversation with them of like, what's your backup plan? When I sort of knew early on that I had an affinity for the arts, liked performing, liked acting, liked creative writing. So pretty early on, at the time when you're sort of at the most like, I think suggestible to self-doubt, I think I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be living in Los Angeles had either one of my parents a single time said like, oh, but what are you going to do for money? Or like, oh, is there something more practical that you can do? I really credit the fact that they didn't ever say anything like that with any successes I may have had since. And then, went to product of the public school system, which in the suburbs of Chicago is really good. Like there's just a fantastic, I think, world-class education. Knew I wanted to pursue theater, primarily acting at the time, although I'd always written a little bit. And then, but wanted to stay in Chicago, which has, particularly at the time, a very vibrant theater community. There's one that rivals at the time, although all theater communities are struggling post-pandemic. That rivaled New York. There'd be arguments that the Chicago theater scene was more vibrant than New York at any given year, based on incubating playwrights. It's at just that size. What's interesting about Chicago, it's just that size. A city a little bit smaller than Chicago, just like would lose its cultural capital. And what's interesting about all those cities, like Buffalo, Detroit, St. Louis, Chicago, all of those other cities except for Chicago really shrunk mid-century, and somehow Chicago was able to maintain a sort of like status as a world-class city, which just means that your population is big enough, your tax base is big enough to get those corporations that will come in and support a theater like Steppenwolf, a theater like Goodman, and then once you have those institutions, you have enough of a critical mass to create an environment where artists can live their whole lives in that city and only work in that city. Then, of course, as soon as I was like ensconced in like Chicago theater, I always had a real chip on my shoulder about wanting to get out. I was sort of like, at the time I'd been working in plays. I was quite lucky coming out of the college that I went to, Loyola University in Chicago, coming out and popping right into the Chicago theater scene. But at that time, it was actually, I thought, in those years, I was like, I'm doing second run plays that played last season in New York. And I was like, my dad was from New York. I'd visited New York a little bit. It always seemed like the white whale, like a scary place. I actually found when I went to New York, it was so different from Chicago. It was so much bigger. It was really scary. And I was like, I need to go there. I need to try this out. And then, so went. I didn't tell anybody. I told my family. I didn't tell any of my peers, most of my friends, that I was leaving and going to Chicago. I've been going to New York from Chicago because I thought it would be a disaster. I thought I'd have to come back in 6 months, and then maybe there'd be like a chance that some people wouldn't have noticed that I left. But it worked out. Worked pretty consistently when I got to New York. Still primarily in theater, but there was more, even more opportunity in commercials and on-camera stuff. I do the odd episode of television, about one feature film a year. I was in a scene or whatever. But I was scraping scraping by enough that I was able to like buy an apartment, which was crazy. Like I was doing well. And then there was just a point at which I sort of got, I got bored. I got jealous of the playwrights that I was like sitting in the room with in rehearsal. And I was like, you know what? Like I really, I need to write. And I'd actually struggled. I'd always written, I'd only been in the theater. The things I had written were always like plays. And it wasn't until I had the idea for something that I was like, no, this is a screenplay, that it was like really, really easy to write. My explanation for that is that plays have to be important to be good. And that's a hard thing to write, is something that you feel is important, but it's not hard to write something that you just think is good. And like a movie or a TV show just has to be good, just has to be entertaining, has to be funny, has to be worth people's time. And so it was once that I like had done that declension in my mind, I was just like, oh, I'm a screenwriter. That's like that, because it was easy. I'm also more visual, I think. So I see things, you see scenes as much as you hear them. And then, it sounds insane to say, but like around that time, this would have been in 2005, news was breaking that my old show choir director from high school was going to prison for like inappropriate sexual contact with a student. The girl I was dating at the time, who had also been in show choir, she was like, I was like, read this. She was like, that happened at my school. And I was like, what is with like inappropriate sexual conduct and glee clubs? And I was like, it was like a total brainwave. I was like, no one's ever written about a glee club. And sat down that summer to write a feature film that was called Glee, through the strangest set of circumstances that I won't bore you with now, ended up in the right lap out here through a friend of a friend, very, very strange set of circumstances. And that producer is Ryan Murphy, who I still collaborate with to this day. So that's kind of like the short version of what brought me here, I guess.
So that was a huge breakthrough.
Huge breakthrough. And it's beyond a big break. Actually, although one person once told me, the wisest thing anybody's ever told me, it was Terry James, who's the artistic director of the Marriott Theater in Lincolnshire, where we grew up. And he once said, he's like, never think of your career, there's no such thing as a big break. Uh-huh. He's like, if you're talented, it'll happen again and again and again. That said, this is pretty big of a break, that this thing I had written had landed in the right lap. But the thing I always tell to people who ask when they do, even though me giving advice to anybody is always weird because everyone's path is so different, everybody's journey is so idiosyncratic. Any advice is usually is so, I think, not applicable in most situations. But the thing I do say is like, if you want to be a writer, like you write. It's the one thing where like you don't have to, you can do it by yourself, and you can be like you're the owner of the means of production. You can like actually do the thing. You can create capital, and then that can be like sold on the marketplace. So it was the first time that I sat down really to do that in earnest, and it worked. Obviously it was 1,000-yard putt, absolutely. But, and it skipped me through. It was like, not only was it just like a big break, it like flipped careers for me and jumped me forward probably about 20 years. It was crazy. I could have spent the rest of my career as it was going to, and to not reach that same point. So I was very, very fortunate, very fortunate.
When you did your Glee screenplay, you weren't just writing, you wound up touching a nerve, you wound up resonating, you wound up speaking for kids in Glee clubs, You wound up speaking for kids who were on the outside of the inside. And I would say that was a breakthrough, a threshold.
Thanks. Yeah. Now I owe a lot of that to my collaborators, Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk. They were, Ryan in particular is just he's a once in a generation talent. I actually think that my original and made the show and the subject matter much more ecumenical and much more sort of like, sort of lifted up both Outsiders and Glee Club and singing and flying your freak flag. Whereas my experience actually in show choir was quite cynical. That's why I ended up being kind of the voice of Sue Sylvester, who's the gym teacher who hates Glee Club in it, because I sort of resented my time in Glee Club. I always thought it was a little bit silly. I always felt quite embarrassed talking about it when people were like, "You were in show choir?" And I was like, God, that is really the least cool thing in my biography, is that I like did that. So it ended up being a really fun leitmotif while this thing that I like did, but felt a little bit nerdy that I was part of, that demon got to be exercised as well by sort of making, it was the genesis of this character who cut against all the saccharine in the show. And I think it was a really crucial aspect of it.
Well, that's helpful for me. We mentioned before that we grew up in towns next to each other, and our Glee clubs in that network of schools, there's nothing like what you see in Glee. No,
nothing at all. Nothing at all.
I mean, that was an incredible kind of roller coaster in which we covered a lot of ground on your story. And just listening to you, we can pick up educational influences.
Yeah.
You talked about Chicago, about the infrastructure, and about New York, and how that sort of taught you things. And then you talked about your parents having confidence in you and really, running with you.
Yeah.
Was there a moment in your childhood when there was some kind of aha moment and you thought, I'm going to go into the arts and theater, this is for me? Was there some turning point?
Yeah, it was early exposure to it. It was, I remember in 4th grade, I had a great teacher who also was like a parishioner at St. Raymond's. So she was always sort of like, I got my eye on you. She would you'd see her on Sunday as well at like church, but she was just lovely. And I think particularly in like, 4th grade was the first time that they were like, we're going to do a Christmas pageant or whatever. And it was some hokey 20-minute thing called like, I'll Be Home for Christmas. And I remember being like, oh, I want to play Santa Claus because Santa Claus is in it. So I was Santa Claus. And she kind of came up to me and she's like, no, I think you should play the lead. And I was like, whoa. She saw something. I was probably just precocious. I think I was always a little bit like class clown adjacent. I would have been a disruptive kid, but I was too much of a rule follower. So I was sort of a little bit mouthy, but I think enough of a grade grubber that I wanted teachers to like me. So I think it was that thing that maybe they saw. I remember my dad, being from Chicago, like every now and then, about once every 2 or 3 years, a big movie would come through to shoot there, like the movie Overboard. And they do these casting calls or whatever. My dad he was the first one to be like, we should go to that. And I remember at first time I was like, not interested. And he said to me, he's like, Ian, actors can make as much as $5 a day. And I was like, in. Like, great. So I remember that. So it was like, it was that sort of a thing. I remember seeing my dad one time played Everyman, like at our church. St. Raymond's did a production of Everyman. And he was, I think being a priest, there's such an aspect of theater to it, not in a fake way or however vague you want to see that, but it was like, I think that was an aspect to it. So I think he modeled that in some ways. And my mom and my sister both have very, very biting senses of humor, just a very, very funny, acerbic sense of humor. So I think that was always a currency in our household, and somehow but it was, to your point, once it was sort of on offer, once I sort of like tasted it a little bit, I was like, oh, there's a genuine fear. I remember it was the first play I was properly in would have been then in like junior high school. I played like the Artful Dodger in Oliver. And I remember standing in the wings because there's about 20 minutes of the play before like the Artful Dodger comes on and is like absolutely like the best role in the play. Like I was the total, you get to steal every possible scene. But I remember standing in the wings and seeing the audience, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can't go out there. And then you hear your cue and you have to go out there. And it's that sort of, like riding the lightning of just fear and like, and really putting yourself out there, I think remained a theme throughout. You sort of get, I think that's what a certain kind of performer chases, it's a mastering of fear really. I think an overmastering of like fear. And then I also, I think you end up being in a way of, it's also I think a lot of people who are innately quite shy as well, you're able to sort of like control the way you're seen as well. And so it's a strange sense of self-authorship as well that I think is an aspect of that, which was just very appealing to me from the minute it happened. And then once at that point, I was like, well, I have to now do this for the rest of my life.
One more question before we go to Eric. Coming back to Glee, did you sense that this was going to be a hit before you put it out?
Not in a million years. And it remains like it's worth saying that like my screenplay was much darker, stranger, drier than the show that we ended up doing, which is a much more mass appeal, much brighter, much poppier. Like if you read the two things, you'd be sort of like, oh, there's a through line here. But the TV show is mostly much separate from what I would have sat down with. That really resulted from a very fruitful and very like immediately really good collaboration with two great other artists as well. But that said, absolutely not. We had no idea. There was even internal to Fox. People were like, there were two factions, like people, which we found out later on, because whatever, success has 1,000 fathers. But like at the time, like people internally to that company, like hated the show. We're like, this is not a Fox show. This shouldn't be a show. And then, which is sometimes a good indication of like that something could work when it's just so different and it's so polarizing.
Felt strongly about it. So
Yeah. So no, but not in a million years. Not in a million years would it still seems like an elaborate prank that it happened at all. It's really
I don't know if that comparison is apt, but the way you frame that reminds me of Wicked, the book versus the stage play, the screenplay, completely different in terms of darkness versus something light and meant to appeal to popularity, literally.
Yeah.
And in doing that, though, you're animated. You're riding the wave of adrenaline when you come out and you're acting. Yeah. But there's a very different set of functionalities when you're writing a screenplay.
Yes, writing is harder, more confronting. It's like sad. It's in a way I sort of like wish I'd never left. Like when I was an actor, I used to like read a lot because at a certain point you could like you've done your work, you've been prepared. You at a certain point have to wait for the phone to ring, to have a job, to collaborate on something. When you're a writer, any moment you could be writing. So any moment you're like trying to take in a sunset or whatever, enjoy a cup of coffee, you're like, oh, I could be writing right now. And that's the hardest thing to overmaster is like, oh wow, like you really have to pace yourself and know that Rome wasn't built in a day. It's a very, it's an iterative process. It's a very lonely process. TV takes some of that away and that you get to like collaborate, you get to bounce ideas off. But like it's a drag. It's hard. It's really hard. But what you do get is you get to be you are the author. You're both performer of all it's all internal to your head. And it's all, to me, there's a lot of listening. You're listening to voice. And I do think that's probably a widow of having a performing background, but you really are listening to things and almost transcribing bits you hear. And then my process in general, I would probably do that first. I'll sort of like almost like as a stenographer would sort of write down what I'm hearing, and then you go back and then you sort of like see it. Then I describe in the format of a screenplay, you describe what you're seeing. So you're actually sort of then directing the first version. You're setting up the camera, you're showing bits, you're giving actors notes through that. So it's actually the most like, in a way, I think it's the most holistic role in the whole thing. You really are soup to nuts. Now there's a whole other thing. Then they have to go, you finish, everybody has to make the thing, which is a whole other thing, but you're at least there. There's a unity and a purity to that process that I think does incorporate the performance bit. The thing that doesn't is it's entirely private. And that is a hard switch to be like, oh, this thing that that is the big difference. You're trading the adrenaline hit sort of like straight to the amygdala of like the immediacy of hearing a laugh, of being of being really in control of 1,000 people or 99 to 999. Whereas that becomes very, very private, very quiet, very internal. That's the difference.
And just to wrap up that, are you aware of other screenwriters / actors who go back and forth between this very public, very private set of domains, or that you take after, or that might want to be model themselves after you?
The person who comes to mind is Tracy Letts, who's a fellow Chicagoan. He's actually from Oklahoma. He, I think, has like somehow cornered the market. He has the coolest career of anybody. And he has a Pulitzer Prize for writing August Osage County. He's been on Broadway as part of the ensemble with Steppenwolf. He's on TV all over the places in movies, married to Carrie Coon. Like, he's just like, you're just like, oh, you've done it. But I actually think it's a skill set that marries well to one another, that I'm surprised there aren't more people. And I usually suggest to people.
Right.
Yeah. And which surprises me. For the longest time, I sort of went around being like, every actor should write, because like you're already halfway there with knowing how to inhabit that sort of like almost like weaponized empathy that you're able to inhabit. But I don't think it's that easy. I think I've like over-indexed for how easy that transition is. And I think it's just some people don't have it. It is really but it's also a skill that you can like cultivate. And actually the biggest thing about writing that people don't account for is how painful it is. And I think a lot of people sit down and write and be like, I couldn't do that, it's painful. Or I'm not good at it because it's painful. And you're like, no. Whether you're good or bad at it, it's painful. It's awful. I mean, I just got off of Why I'm Late. It's not just kind of like a terrible conference call that is just, it's just like all these, it can be really difficult. It's a difficult job at best. And that's when it's at the point of like something, but like to have to sit down and stare at a blank page, that's as close to I mean, there's people who live their whole lives. We have a whole distraction, infrastructure in our world to allow people to avoid that sort of like quiet and like sort of like self examination. So it's like not fun at all. And so I actually think there's probably more people walking around with this skill set, but have never really been told like, no, it's a craft. You have to like work through, and it's the ways to get through it are really simple. Like I'm always telling people, like, you have to do it for an hour a day. You can't do it for less. Turn off your phone, get an egg timer, and you sit down for an hour, and don't even do it for more than an hour, but sit down and you do not get up until the thing was come up, and you do it the next day. And I just challenge anybody to do that. You will completely externalize something internal to your mind that you didn't think was there.
Okay. So now we're getting into something we're passionate about, education. What do you think a great education should entail? I mean, some of what you've described, can you weave that into the perfect school, the perfect pedagogy?
Well, you will hear my bias towards the Jesuit education here. But I remember the first time I heard, and I was youngish, would have been in elementary school, where I heard the term jack of all trades. And immediately I was like, well, that's me. I want to be that. I want to be, or Renaissance man. Maybe that was like the verbiage, but I remember feeling a deep affinity to that it was like, no, I like a lot of things. And it's not even like I'm easily bored. It's not even like I get tired of things and move on. It's just that like I think the healthiest mind is one that is interested and curious about a lot of different things. The reason why I sort of peg that as particularly Jesuit, which it isn't at all, is they their main thing is what was great about and having a public education and then going into a nominally religious education. Even though I grew up, Catholic, we went to mass most Sundays, even though my parents we weren't the most religious family. We were practicing Catholics, I suppose. So it's not like I hadn't been exposed to religion or spirituality or however you want to call it, but I hadn't been exposed to like religious education really outside of CCD, which is like a capital J joke, like a total waste of Wednesday nights. And then but it was like one of the coolest things is that one of the first times I ever sat down and had a priest for a professor. And it was for like a New Testament exegesis. Like it was like a New Testament study. So I was like, okay. And the first thing he said, he's like, yeah, so if anybody's like super religious, you're not going to take this class. Like we're going to be looking at the Bible as if it's a document. It is a document. This is sometimes a problem. So if anybody is like really, really devout or whatever, this might not be the class for you. And I was like, this is the school for me. I was like, this is really interesting. The way of like, wow, first of all, this place is not afraid of sort of like examining shibboleths and sort of like deconstructing things that are sometimes seen as like something you shouldn't deconstruct. Like, and then so Jesuit education tends to be like, you get to college, a lot of, even if you did AP classes and passed out of certain things, they're like, nope, still have to take them. Sort of like a really broad gen ed requirements, some of which were okay. Like you have to take like a intro to English, and you're like, I can write a 5-paragraph essay or whatever, but just to really make sure everyone's on board. And then they sort of make you do, no matter what, like a section of theology and philosophy. And I thought that was just geared towards like, oh, this is about, they want to really make you think about the way you think. And I remember sitting down at a first class, I somehow like accidentally signed up for like sort of an advanced, it was like a 401 class. I remember I was like a freshman, like my first day, and it was like, it was an epistemology class. I didn't even really know what epistemology was, but was sort of like, should I be in here? And they were like, yep. Like, what do you think, everybody? Should he be in here? Like it was just, I suddenly felt like this urge to sort of survey all sorts of things. And I guess that's a liberal arts education.
Well, that is one of the leading philosophy departments in the country, the one that you were in.
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, I took a class that I gave the commencement speech at my university a few years ago. And I was like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I could like, I still on a daily basis recall some, like this one class I took that was about the way we think about the future. It's called Imagining the Future. It was like the head of it was just like John McCarthy, you might know him, and he was like, and it was a survey of different ways that people throughout history have thought about the notion of what the future is, which I would never have been like, oh, right. Like the ancient Hebrews they wouldn't have thought about it the way we do. We think of it as radical change, or that there will even be change, that like the Mosaic tradition just thought of it as land. The future was land. Things like that. You're like, wow, that's like, you often hear a lot. Here's the other thing, and then I'll shut up. But about like, I remember hearing a snippet of like, Peter Thiel did this thing, which is probably laudable, I guess, of being like, paying kids to not go to college and to come work for him or whatever. It'd be like engineering students and be like, come work for me and I'll show you and you'll skip this whole thing. And this whole thing was like, because a degree in engineering from Stanford is not worth what you'll pay for it. And I was like, oh, maybe that's an engineering degree, but I would describe my like liberal arts education in college as like so priceless you couldn't put a price tag on it. It's like it can't even be quantified, in that it's literally a laboratory where you're taught to examine how you learn. Like I can't imagine you'd be like, that could have cost 10 times what it did. And it's not like it's cheap, but I was like, I just profoundly disagree at that notion. I think that education can't be, the price of it can't be quantified.
Well, so long as you're saying all these nice things, and I'm sorry, Conrad, for this one last one. You are talking about the school where I first taught and where I was tenured. So while you're glomming on the praise, is there anything you have to say about the math or computer science departments?
No, had no exposure to them. Oh, I did take. That's the one thing, is the Jesuits are also easy on math. They're like, just take one. But I took a statistics class because I'd never thought of myself as that strong in math. It was never something I was interested in. I don't think it's taught well, at least at the time.
It's not taught well anywhere, but go ahead.
No, I'll bet there. Yeah, it's like I wish someone had said like, hang on until calculus, and then it's going to get interesting.
It gets interesting.
Yeah. And then that becomes like physics, and that becomes electromagnetism. But like, no, I was like, get me out of here. I had literally one math teacher being like, supposedly, I don't remember him saying this, but he once said to me, he's like, one time you raised your hand and said like, when am I going to use this? And he said to me, he's like, well, you never will need to. I don't think I was that precocious to have said that, but anyway, it was short story long. I think that the more things you're interested in, the better it is for your brain, or at least that was my experience.
You've probably heard the story of Descartes. He went to this famous Jesuit school called La Flèche in Paris.
I haven't heard this.
Descartes was an insomniac, and this was a real problem for him. And he was allowed to sleep in by the Jesuits. And he attributes this to his philosophy, because in the early morning torpor of 4 o'clock, his thoughts came to him, but he was exhausted, and he was allowed to sleep in until something like 10 o'clock and carry on with the day. And when he was commissioned by Queen Christina of Sweden to be her tutor, she was insisting on this Teutonic schedule of waking up at the crack of dawn, and it basically killed him. Yes. So, no, I mean, listening to you on an education, you speak of a broad-based education, and you spoke about metacognition, or knowing how to know and learning how to learn. And you also, I heard you sort of speaking about an adventurous mindset and exploration.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your definition of intelligence?
That's a good question. I don't know, because I remember being as a kid, it was very important that I thought of myself as smart. But sometimes I find myself as like very thick about some things. I'll occasionally walk around some days and be like, I'm real bright. And then other days you'll be like, oh, I'm just as thick as they come. It's probably, I would probably answer that by bringing it back to curiosity, that I think that you can, intelligence might be sort of knowing what you don't know and having the curiosity to sort of find out. I'll often find, in the current, just anecdotally, like most of the current work, a lot of the current work I'm doing is in the true crime genre, which is dark and although very fun in a lot of ways. But a lot of times you will, for instance, in researching the Menendez brothers, there is a level at which you don't. I was surprised at how quickly you could, by just reading a couple of books here or there, that you can feel across something. It wasn't like, and I didn't know every detail, but you're like, I think you can get the gist of things and understand, you can understand subjects a lot sooner than I would have thought. I've become more ready as I get older to just dive into something. And then I'm always like, oh no, it doesn't actually take as long to actually understand. And just doing another research thing of like wanting to learn a bit about, talking about intelligence, about AI, because I was like, I didn't know anything about that. That seems so mysterious, like such a literal black box. Reading a couple books, you at least get some understanding of it. And I feel like it's a deeper dive than just Googling things, but I've become more and more pleased with the fact that you sometimes don't have to become expert level to be sort of to know much more than the average bear about a certain topic. Anyway, to your point, I think that it's like, I don't know. What do you think intelligence is?
Well, I hear you talking about curiosity and also being able to grasp concepts relatively quickly. Look, ultimately, intelligence tends to be defined as adaptability or adaptation to an environment, which is open-ended enough for several types of intelligence to be considered. But the podcast is on intelligence because we don't really know ourselves, and also I think you've got scientific, cognitive, historical, cultural definitions of intelligence, and a definition of intelligence, general intelligence, which is really behind the fairly rigid assessment system that we have in schools today. But we also know that there are all sorts of intelligences out there that aren't really nurtured in schools, not formally.
Part of the general intelligence rubric. They're just very different. They go way beyond.
Exactly. So we're sort of dreaming of what we can do in schools to not just recognize different intelligences, but nurture them and really grow them, not in spite of an assessment system, but through it. Everything converges at high school. The universal metric at the end of high school is a narrow, high stakes test taking. And so we're producing test takers.
Very brittle definition.
When we want something else. I mean, test taking is great. We don't want to throw those babies out with the bathwater, but what about all the creatives and the critical thinkers?
I agree with that, and that actually I think that it's like when I was in school, I was like a good, not great student. I got a lot of I would have gotten A's and B's. Would have been like pretty good at honors math, but wouldn't have been the top. Would have been in BC, what was called BC, not even BC math. It would have been 70. I would have been at 80 math. There was 90, 80, 70, 60, 50. I would have been at 80 math. So I was always, in fact, the thing I am most annoyed about, I still, again, it all worked out, but I got rejected from Northwestern, a school I wanted to go to, and it still annoys me. I still am every time I remember it, there's a pang of annoyance. I wasn't in the top 10% of my class. I would have been, and yet I feel like I would have been, I was I'm smarter than that. I'd be I could go toe to toe with anybody who was ahead of me in class. Now I would almost feel if you had to ask, I'd be well, I've surpassed them. I'm being, but it's it wasn't, that hadn't formed yet. And it was I didn't even, to your point, I didn't even understand really what, no one would explain pre-calculus is sort of it's the study of curves, and those are all how manifolds of a circle. That's all just how do you do tangents to a circle? Somebody could have said that, and maybe I would have understood it more that way, but it was just that was not how it was going to go. It was, so in a way I sort of was, I that's nice to hear that. I've never actually heard it framed in that way, that it's that it's meant to meet at the end of high school, but it's presumably then that's sort of people say that about college. It's that's and that would be my prior as well. I'd be college is where you learn how to learn. You learn, and you learn how to just cut through. You learn what seems true and what doesn't. I think is I think it's you get a sense of smell about information, I think, and about ideas, and you're able to be well, that's total bullshit, and that isn't. So that jibes with my experience. I've never quite formulated it that way.
There's something though about the way you came out of that experience. And by the way, I'm really happy that someone from the neighborhood and from Loyola came out way ahead of everyone else.
Let's say that's my self-description, but sure. Yeah.
No, that's my.
Okay, good. I'm
glad.
Fair enough.
I'm glad someone from the hood.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So, but I think about when you did the screenplay for Glee, you touched on something that, and you'd say, well, no one was expecting that, but that was the point. You found something that was potent, even if you put it in the rough, dark form.
Yeah.
And I think about the same question when Descartes' up at 4 a.m. in the morning. Somebody at some point in history, and it was probably Descartes because he's the one we named the system after, someone had the idea that if you take two number lines and put them perpendicular, you have a coordinate plane. That revolutionized society and culture worldwide. Yeah. Somebody came up with the idea of telling the story of Glee clubs. Yeah. And I put those in the same category as flashes that you call that intelligence. Where did that insight or that threshold come?
I mean,
this is a spark of creativity.
This is where it gets a bit metaphysical, and I'm about the least. I'm among the less, quote unquote, religious people you'll come across. But I do think there is some. If someone said tomorrow to me that that consciousness was a field of which our brains are highly attuned detectors, I'd be like, duh, I can't believe it took till that seems much more along the lines of what I've experienced in flow states or in the creative realm. Then no, these are all things that each mind is self-contained. We are, by definition, we exist within the physical constraints of our human brain. That because most of the time when you have an idea, it's almost as if, and I think Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and then wrote a great book on creativity, which I haven't read, but someone told me this thing that she describes creativity as like doing the work of sitting down day after day, of sitting, and what you're doing when you sit down at a table to write or to paint or whatever is just putting up a net. It's this invisible net that just catches ideas. And that is actually much more, that's what being creative to me feels like, that you're like, oh, I can't totally take credit for that idea because the idea came to me. It's like the idea was external to you. It also like strikes, it's sometimes, and again, this could be just, I don't know what the technical term would be, whether it's like confirmation bias or whatever, but I swear to you that if I have an idea that's good, that I feel it's good, be like, oh, I can't sell that. If I sit on it, it will appear in Variety within that year. It'll be an idea that's similar. And you're like, oh, that's been in this idea of like, yeah, it's out in the ether. And you're like, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a literal ether, and that our brains, or a brain, and our brains extend to our fingertips, like where our nervous system is not some kind of organic antenna almost. It sounds crazy to say, but it's just like that seems to me more plausible than probably whatever the model is now of independent brains that are completely separate from one another.
So we've moved from Chicago to New York to LA to the world to now some kind of cosmic conscience as we've had this discussion. It's been incredible. It's been really fascinating hearing from you and following your thinking and your brilliant mind as you take us through all these questions of creativity, education, social interactions, moments of revelation. And thank you for being here, Ian.
My pleasure. What a treat.